Hi, welcome to Sunlight on Suffield. Today we're here with the Hartford County Young Democrats, and we're happy to be here with Andre Simons, the Hartford County President of the Young Democrats, and Jessica Weaver, the Vice Chair of the Newington Board of Education, and also heavily active with the Young Democrats of Hartford County. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
So a hot topic, as you know, is affordable housing, and I imagine that's a very important issue to Young Democrats across the state. People are looking for their first homes, they're looking to save money for retirement, all these things. So how would you like to comment on that a little bit? How is affordable housing defined?
Sure. Usually in the state of Connecticut, affordable housing is defined based on a earning level. And from there, if you are under that threshold, there is supplements that the state does provide to make sure that you have affordable housing. Mm-hmm. If you are above that, there are, like you were talking about, first-time home buyers or whatever the case is, families. All of those individuals have tax credits and other benefits that they can draw on from the state of Connecticut. We do provide that domestically. So those are some of the supports, and I know the Treasurer's Office has some too, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to know is maybe the definition in legal statute of affordable, maybe not what is in reality affordable. There is always some type of income limit or income range that is tied to it, and even with that, it may not correspond likely in the same way to the rent price. So it may be that you have a $100,000 salary, but you are still going to be paying $3,000 for a unit, and that is considered affordable, right? So it's a bit of a disconnect or a dichotomy between what is affordable on paper and what is affordable in the reality just in the state of Connecticut. And I think that is becoming much more of a divide and much more of a difference in definition there. But there are programs out there, I think, and we can talk about this as we go on, but I think some of them that are helpful are especially the time to own, some other tax credits that are available to try and help, particularly when it comes to down payments on housing, and other programs that help kind of make that affordable actually correct to its definition.
Yeah, and rent is sky high right now, and I always wonder how people just starting out in life can afford it, and if they're starting behind the eight ball kind of and not able to save, and time is money. This is the time young people should be saving, and they can't do it, and it's going to impact them down the road. So
you're preaching to the choir.
Yes.
Right? It's one of those things that I currently I just signed a lease about a month ago, and I'm currently moving into my first apartment at the ripe old young age of 27. And it's one of those things that has really been hard to grapple with, especially graduating out of grad school in the pandemic, trying to save for my first job, my salary, save for retirement, think of all these things that are foundational to setting myself up for success. And it is a struggle, and I think one of the hardest things too I find is many of the rental properties are owned by either private equity companies or outside companies that are not local to Connecticut, and those prices range every day. So I could say one in my neighboring town of Wethersfield, I watch it daily. It has gone from $1,775 last year to $2,635.
Oh,
that's crazy.
And it ranges and will fluctuate every single day. So sometimes there's a volatility of $400 a day per month in a unit.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Wow, how times have changed.
Yeah, it's definitely eaten into the ethos of what our parents have taught us, which is like, oh, we're only supposed to spend 30 or some odd % on housing, right? We've all heard that before. But at this point, when I've talked to younger people, it's 50%. It's not anything close to what we were being told when we were younger. So.
Did you want to
Sure.
start?
So one question we have is, how is the state of Connecticut working to make housing affordable?
So I think those tax benefits definitely help. The state overall has removed some of the tax expectations on certain towns and municipalities, even though it might not feel like it, because those towns and municipalities still keep those taxes in place, like the motor vehicle tax is a great example of that. Statewide, it's not a thing anymore. They've said it's up to each town to make that decision, and each town has decided to keep it in because it obviously helps their operational budget. So, I mean, this is where you have these kinds of announcements where overall the state is trying to support, but then you have the disconnect of these local towns not really understanding why are they allowing us to make that cut now, and how it would actually help a lot of their residents. Because at least again, for a lot of younger people that I talk to, they don't have cars, they don't have affordable transportation, they're sacrificing most of their vehicle costs for rent, and then they supplement with public transportation. So, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where the issue is, but at the same time, I think the state has really done, some good strides with trying to
Unfortunately,
help.
Suffield does not have public transportation.
No, yeah,
We are definitely need a car.
That is
town.
a top 2 issue for young Dems.
Yep.
Housing and then transit
Yeah.
is literally right behind it. It's just one of those things where even if you do find a place that's affordable, it's not near a bus stop.
Right.
Correct.
It's not near anything that's realistic for a younger person that may be starting out. Oh, now I have to walk an hour to get to a bus stop to then go to work. And
Yep.
it's like you're waking up at 4 a.m. for an 8 o'clock job. Is that really what you want to do with your life?
Yeah.
It's tough.
How to spend your time.
Yeah.
And that's
And-
really what's come up is the transit-oriented
Yes.
development, right?
Yeah.
So
It's
the
hot and
TODs, it's a hot topic,
Yeah.
right? But it is one of those things I think that comes up regularly because it is one of those things that is a high demand because we're sacrificing that one or the other. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul wherever you are. And I think that's one of the difficulties is there's opportunity, right? Especially given, so much of the focus on our proximity to New York and Boston, everywhere but Connecticut. But we should be focusing on in Connecticut. And I think that's one of the things that is one of the things we hear from young people all the time and ourselves struggle with. And I think it is one of the difficult things that is trying to be tackled at the same time. And there's that kind of struggle between the towns and the state to
Yeah.
find that right silver bullet.
The
Yeah.
local at the Capitol now, I'm there with my job. I'm a lobbyist on other issues. But the transit-oriented, there's bills out there, and it's the big local control argument, and they use that as an excuse not to bring in affordable housing and develop transit-oriented because they want to keep things like they were back in the 1950s, and it's just not working. That model doesn't work. It may have worked back then. It's not working now. I'd argue that it didn't work back then either, but it's not working now, for sure.
A lot of the breakdowns for that, it's funny you mentioned the 50s, and I actually was just reading up on this, is that back during that time, rent was cheaper, significantly cheaper,
Yeah.
but luxuries were massively expensive. You had $1,000 TVs when your rent was only a couple $100s kind of deal, and now it's kind of inversed, where
That's interesting.
all of our luxuries, I could get a big screen TV for $100.
Yep.
But my rent is massively high. Like there's just no way to rectify that. So.
Did we watch the same video? Because I did. Us youngsters on the internet. But it is one of the things I think that's so important to talk about is that it's so inverted, and then also the level and the rate at which the increase of inflation of housing prices versus our real wages, and particularly in a state where it's heavily taxed, where it is expensive to live in general, you're seeing over the course, and I don't know the exact statistics because it's different per study, but it's at least 3 to 6 times in terms of how much housing has gone up, and then one time up in labor for every that ratio is getting bigger and bigger between the amount that housing is going up and then the amount our wages are not catching up.
Do you know if Connecticut is different from other states? Are we doing better or are we doing worse?
So unfortunately, the sad truth to this is we're in a similar situation as a lot of other states. And the reason for that is because of what Jess actually mentioned earlier, which is these private companies that come in, they buy swaths of properties. It's not even just multifamily housing, it's single family housing. It's every single type of housing. Zillow, multiple organizations have this. I know Zillow has, I think, 60% of literally all of the housing market in the entire United States.
Oh, wow.
So they literally hold on to houses and apartments and whatnot to jack up the price. And then when it's equitable for them, when they need that profit margin, they then sell it and release it. But we then see, even with these outrageous rents, we have not very well maintained apartments too. So then you lose the humanity in it as well. So there's just more and more humanity lost, I would say, with the rates.
That's true, and that's important. That's quality of life for everybody all around. And
So housing costs in Greenwich are going to be much higher than, say, housing costs in Suffield and Field. How does the state's definition of affordable housing account for these real estate and rental cost disparities?
So there is an ultimate equation, I would say, and it factors into the cost of living of the town itself, and then it also factors into your earning amount as well, and then what the average earning amount is around you. So it's a very complicated math in that sense, but it allows for Greenwich to have a different cost of living than, say, Suffield. And that's kind of how everything tries to average out, but then you get places that have $3,000 rents compared to other places that may be in Connecticut that have, couple $100 rents, and that's just really going up and down in the extremes. But I've seen places in, I would say, at least the more rural parts of Connecticut where housing, maybe $700-800. That's it, and then utilities on top of that, sure. But then Greenwich or anywhere like that, it's definitely more. It's compounded. It's just crazy.
It is helpful, though, in one sense of the program Time to Own, which is to help first-time home buyers on a down payment. The income limit is much higher in Greenwich, so it accounts for knowing that a home would likely be much more expensive, although it's all expensive.
Yeah.
So
but it's proportional for someone who needs to live there for work, or if it's in that area.
So, and I think it accounts for, obviously we see higher wages, higher costs in Fairfield County in general as a blanket statement, but it is one of the things that they account for. So then your amount that you can earn is higher, so it accounts for that. So at least even if you do have a higher salary, they recognize that you're likely going to pay a proportionally higher amount in what you're trying to buy, and it helps you at least have a better chance at getting somewhat of a down payment on a house.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the Young Democrats. You're the Hartford County president, Andre. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. I am also the state level vice president, just as an extra preface there. But I wear a lot of hats. But I always like to start off saying that Young Dems is a continuum. It starts at the age of 14, believe it or not, even if you can't register to vote, and it ends at 35. That is the full continuum, but within that, you have subsections of Young Dems. You have high school Democrats, you have college Democrats, and then after you get out of college Democrats, it's just Young Dems until you age out, and then you just go into the state central party, essentially.
Young at heart Dems.
Yep.
That's what
Age
we
out
like to
at
call
30.
So a lot of those have different levels of supports and expectations. Definitely for, I would say, more high school Dems, it's more parent-oriented. It's more parent-oriented just because older individuals obviously going into a high school, not very kosher. And then even for the college Dems, it's who's really plugged in at UConn, who's plugged in at Western or Central or Eastern, and it's who is, finger on the pulse there. So they have that understanding, and they get to do their more internal politics because there's all sorts of things that could be done for colleges. But then once you kind of get out of that, there's an expectation that you've kind of been around the block a minute and you've maybe had a position or two, and now you want to keep investing. It's not that you're automatically getting into an officer position or anything like that, but that you're going to involve yourself with either your local Democratic town council, a state race, or whatever the case is. And that's where Young Dems, just generally as an organization, comes to support every town, every city, every state, or in the United States, actually. We have Young Dems nationally, but Connecticut Young Dems definitely helps everybody.
Are most towns in Connecticut, do they have Young Dem groups?
So we regionalize. We don't have local town Young Democrat groups. We found that it becomes way too much. So there's a running joke, at least in my own profession, where every town in the state of Connecticut, there's 169 of them. We call them 169 fiefdoms. We don't call them 169 towns. And it's because each one of them has a way that they want to operate and maintain their self, and that's totally fine. But for younger individuals, we're not governing. So there's no reason for us to really have those specific towns. While some town councils may have a young chapter of their town council, it is not a sanctioned Young Democrats chapter. Young Democrats of America specifically only does the regions and the state. So, and then this last election we had about 200 young people involved in races across the state. So
that's nice. Great.
Yeah.
future leaders.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, of the
and
of the-
current leaders too.
and
'cause
current
we
leaders
have many that are actually elected right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not just myself, but
Yes.
many others that are elected at the local level, and then we just have a races coming up too with 2 young Dems that are in special elections.
Fantastic.
This next
Very
week.
nice.
And you, Jessica, you were elected at a very young age to the Newington
Yeah.
Board of Education. How old were you?
I was 21.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Good for you. That's
Now I'm
fabulous.
an old one. Yeah.
But you have a lot of experience and you're still very young. That's great. So affordable housing, you're doing a great job explaining why it's important. Do you have any empirical data to show this? Like, have there been surveys, or how do you gather information to know what's important to young people?
So every year, typically we have something called a legislative priorities meeting. The CT Mirror published our legislative priorities meeting last year,
Yep.
and that is an open forum for every region to come together at the LOB, and we talk about what issues we really feel like need to be in the top 10. We try to keep it to top 10. There's, a million different issues that we could do, but I mean, just to do the greatest hits, at least the top 5, you have housing, transit-oriented development, racial equity, disability equity, education costs, and then healthcare costs. Those are-
Disability equity?
Correct.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Correct.
Yeah.
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 Usually not an issue for younger people.
Just
you
for people who don't know, what is LOB?
The legislative
Oh, thank
office
you.
building,
Thank
my
you.
apologies. And I will definitely say I had a little bit of an influence for the disability equity piece just because of my background. I'm very much an advocate in the disability
good.
sphere. My parents are deaf, my sister's deaf, so I definitely advocate a lot, and I've helped actually write a couple of laws for the state in terms of interpreting and whatnot for individuals that are deaf. So.
And I will say, Andre's quite modest, but he's incredibly influential. And I think a lot of us, especially in the greater Harvard area, are actually really focused on this. One of our good friends, who is the former president of Greater Harvard Young Dems, Emily Zambrello, she is now a town councilor in Wethersfield, and she's their first disabled counselor.
Oh, wonderful.
And so it's one of the things, and then I work at the treasurer's office, and we have a program called ABLE, which
Yeah.
allows folks who have disabilities to be able to save money on top of their SSI. So
Yeah.
we actually talk a lot my about this, and I think it's one of the things that maybe, to your point, is
Yeah.
not talked about as much at a younger age.
It isn't. It's a great thing, and
Yeah.
it's important. My mother was handicapped for most of my life, and it's a hard challenge to live in the world without accessibility. It's like everything is stacked against, and it's really difficult. And deaf, I can imagine that's very challenging.
Oh, absolutely. I remember very clearly, not to belabor it too much, but I remember times where I've walked into a McDonald's with my mother
Yeah.
and they've refused her service because she can't speak.
Yeah.
And even though she has 2 master's degrees, she
Yeah.
can write,
Yeah.
and she was writing the order,
Yeah.
they still refused her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had to come in and interpret.
Wow.
It's just one of those things that sticks with you once you've had
sh-
quite a harrowing experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, good for you to turn that into activism.
Absolutely.
It's a great thing. So, how do you get young Democrats to be active? How do you motivate people who might not otherwise be interested in politics at a young age? Could be perceived as a dry topic for most kids, say. They're busy with maybe getting into shenanigans and things like that.
Or starting college.
Right, we're starting college,
I'll-
distracted.
I think one of the things that's difficult, especially when it comes to even creating chapters with young Dems and getting a dedicated and reliable base, is that it's a time in your life when you are very transient. It's the most transient population, right? So even when we're talking about voting, it's incredibly difficult sometimes to know, are you going to be voting on college campus? Are you going to be voting at home? And where can we put our efforts? So it's a difficult thing to nail down a couple, where are you even at? Where can you put your activism towards, especially when they're in maybe a bubble of college or their bubble of school, and that's really the majority of their life. One of the things that we find that is really helpful to get people, young people in particular, really excited about things is we've known the power of social media, but we've seen since, I think, 2016, a real passion for things that impact them, and I think young people's voices and knowing that they can have a voice.
Right.
I think being able to have, now we're oldies, so we're not on social media as much, but it is one of the things that we've seen younger people feel really empowered and more connected. So even if they are out at UConn and they live in the middle of nowhere in Sonia, they're able to have connections to their hometown, and we are letting people know how easy it is to get involved most of the time, and how willing people are to be able to listen to young people and that our voices matter. So the biggest thing is making sure they know they have a voice and be able to empower themselves to do that. I think that's a really motivating factor, that people do care what you have to say. And I think that's really the biggest barrier is getting over that.
Right.
So, and the biggest motivator is to know that. So bringing them to the Capitol, introducing them to young legislators as well. My legislator, Gary Turco, he was a young Dem as well.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
one of those things where he brought me in and he was the one who asked me to run. And so it's one of those things where we kind of build our bench through these one-on-one connections, and then as well, that base then attracts other people to say, I see you guys are doing this, I want to be a part of it, I want to lend my voice to it, knowing that I can have much larger voice than maybe just my school, maybe just, the local newspaper. We can make national headlines, and we see that, young people that are making national headlines.
Yeah.
It is one of the things that's incredibly motivating to know your voice can reach much farther than your backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think the second biggest hurdle, at least when talking to people, is my vote doesn't matter. I've heard that so many times.
Yes.
It is such a belabored topic, but I consistently tell them, because there are towns in Connecticut where a race was decided by 10 votes, not even. So if you and 5 of your friends got together, imagine the power you can have in your town. I mean, it's just crazy. And then even if you make calls and all of these things, how many people you can touch in a day just to change an opinion. And I've done phone banking, and I've had people, when I talk to them and start, they're not going to vote for the candidate that I'm trying to help. And then by the end of it, they're ready. And I mean, that's just kind of a powerful thing. And having people see that kind of inspires them in a weird way. So that's usually why we're like, come on, join us. Even if you're a little afraid, just watch us, do our magic, and then you can decide what you want to involve yourself with.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed too. I'm a former state rep myself from many years ago, and it doesn't take that many people to influence a legislator to get their vote or to get them to bring up legislation, because so few people reach out, because everyone thinks, oh, they're bombarded. And they're bombarded by a lot of information, but not from constituents necessarily.
Right.
And so when you hear from 10 people, it's a big thing, and you have to take action on it. So,
and it's one of the things I always tell young people. People are counting on you not to come out.
Yes,
People
exactly.
are counting on you to stay home, to not speak out, and they are just assuming that you are going to not be involved. So when you are involved, they really like to lift that voice up and say, look at this example, the few and far between. And what we want that to kind of flip the entire narrative is that we assume you're going to be involved, that you are going to have an active voice in your community. And really, it's one of the things, we talk about on Board of Ed all the time, we talk about in our community is just the impact that you can have. Maybe you start at just changing, the styrofoam to plastic, styrofoam to paper in your school lunches, or you do something inside your school, knowing that you have that power to influence, and then taking it a step. Once you take that inch, you can take a mile, and you can take that to a bigger thing. But I always tell people, they're shocked. They're like, even when we knock on doors, they're like, how old are you? Are you selling Girl Scout cookies? No. But it is one of those things where they don't assume to see a young person, and quite frankly, I've been lucky because they're at least more willing, because they do think it's Girl Scout cookies usually.
Right.
But, they're more willing to open the door
Right.
and have a conversation. They're like, may I ask, how old are you? And they're just like, wow, it's so nice to see. And it's a really heartwarming conversation just by being someone who's young. I didn't realize how much that doubt was seated in everyone, that we just assume young people will not be involved because they are naive or don't know. And that's just not the case.
they think they lack the knowledge, but they have far more power,
Yeah.
and sometimes can think more clearly. They're smart, and they think that older people sometimes know so much more, so much more. We're winding down to about 5 minutes, I think, so we have a few more minutes to chat. But they can offer a lot and take the reins of power. Young people need to take it over. That's when we're going to start seeing significant policy changes for transit-oriented development and the like, and something to rein in, like people purchasing that there has to be a legislative solution to that when they're buying up properties. I know that's a little tricky with the market, but
Ideas have been bandied around. I'm not going to say that it hasn't. And one of them, and this is more of like a Bernie Sanders kind of concept, and I've heard a lot of younger people say it, is rent control. Like controlling the rent according to what the actual cost is in the area, not what the actual property value is. And I mean, I've heard that from a lot of young people. Considering it is a tough one because you have to kind of do that middle ground of not aggravating corporations at the same time, because we just literally had Duracell move out from Connecticut today. So
wow.
unfortunately, we lost that manufacturing sector, and we want to keep those jobs. So that's kind of that tough balance, I would say. I think there's a lot of legislative possibility, and I think at least in the last legislative session, they did a cap on how much you can increase your rent, but it doesn't cap if someone leaves. You could just reset everything
yes,
to a higher,
yeah.
price, and that's, I think, where the issue becomes
Yeah.
like the next step in legislation. If I was going to really think about it like that.
I have one final question. I think we have a little bit of time here. Young Democrats, I'm sure there's a counter Young Republicans group.
Yes.
Who's better and why?
I would definitely say Young Dems, just personal bias there a little bit,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I just don't see them around.
Okay.
I just don't see them. I mean, as much as we want to talk about Young Dems not showing up to certain races, I haven't seen a Young Republican
Either.
at all.
Yeah.
Like I've
Come up
seen
to Suffield.
young Republicans run errantly every
Yeah.
couple of towns over. Joe Canino and
Yeah.
what is it, Torrington
Yeah.
or whatever. But he outseated Michelle Cook. But like just
Oh,
beyond
yeah.
that, there's
Yeah.
nothing. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're the best only because we know that power, right? And
Yeah.
we make the efforts to do so. I think that's one of the things, and we recognize we're lucky to live in a state that has that representation at the top, but also people like Andre leading that charge
Yes.
to be able to demand more representation within our own party,
Yeah.
to say that we want young people at all levels.
Yes, I agree. Well, I applaud. We applaud the work
Yes.
you do, and I think we have 2 more minutes here, right? Do you,
Yeah, got 2 more minutes.
Yeah. So, do you have any closing comments?
I definitely would say, if you're thinking about getting involved, get involved. Like, don't even hesitate. Don't be like, oh, I don't know if I should go to this town council meeting. Oh, I don't know if I should go to this Democratic town council meeting. Like, oh, there's going to be a lot of old people there. Don't worry about it. I am the only one in a sea of gray, and it just happens like that. But when you do, every so often, you will find those younger people that then will start to flock to you. And just by the grace of me showing up to the Farmington town council and the Democratic town council meetings in Farmington, which is where I am, I've been appointed to wetlands and zoning, and I've had 4 or 5 younger people approach me personally, and they've now become Young Dems. So it's,
Very nice.
Yeah.
war
By
of small
example.
steps.
Yeah. Giving people the permission and the courage to take the step that you've
We're
done.
happy to bring you into that family
Yeah.
of young people that want to learn more. And I'll just say, I came into a random community event. I saw on the old Facebook that Turco was running, and I haven't looked back since. It's the reason why I'm here. And I just came and talked about how I felt about the town and how I felt. I didn't know anything about politics.
Yeah.
You don't need to know anything to want to be involved. I always say you're more than qualified to run. You're more than qualified to lead if you just know your community, and you do by living there.
And Gary's a great state rep. We want to say that. He's wonderful. He's leading the charge on, one of the people leading the charge on the pet shop bill that we're working on. And he had a great public hearing, was asking great questions, but you're very well represented.
I cannot agree more, and was on
Yeah.
housing today.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
it is one of those things we love, and he is great.
Yes. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you for watching Sunlight on Suffield, and we'll see you next month.